Okay, my clock just struck 8. I think it's time to start. So welcome everybody to Harnessing Stability, the role of internal controls in state and local government. We appreciate you being here with us this morning. I think we've got a lot of great content to share with you. But before we get started with the content, there are a few housekeeping items we need to take care of. So you're going to need your phone. So if you have your phone nearby, grab it if you can, because there's going to be a few QR codes like the one on your screen that you could take a picture of, and it'll be way more convenient. Or you can go to the URL. This is so you can get credit for the CPE. We're giving 1 hour CPE for your attending today. It's continuing professional education. So you can use your mobile phone or you can use your computer. Like I said, I think it's easiest just to use your mobile phone. When you get to that QR code or when you get to that website, what you're going to do is select this session, Harnessing Stability, the role of internal controls in state and local government. You're going to enter the appropriate information and you're going to click on check in. And then once you check in, you'll see that screen that you see on your phone. It's an app called Conferences.io, and this is how we track your CPE credit. Throughout the session, there will be prompts for you to do certain things, and the first prompt is coming up. So as I keep rambling on, hopefully you've been able to get to that site, because we have a code that you're going to want to enter in now. The first code is 938. So there's that QR code again. So if you didn't have a chance to grab it the first time, you can grab it now. In the chat, if you open up the chat feature of the webinar, there's also a link to the Conferences.io app. First code's 938. Enter that code, and obviously, if you look at the slide, it says 1 of 3. There's going to be 2 more coming up. So I'll try to do my best to announce ahead of time they're coming up, so you can grab your phone and get yourself ready. All right, I think I've talked long enough about that. My name is Steve Randall. A colleague of mine, Carrie Urbanski, is here with me. Hi, Carrie.
Hello, good morning.
I am a managing partner with Sikich in the governance, risk, and compliance practice. I live in Chicago. I've been with the firm now for almost 12 months. Before joining Sikich, I was the managing partner of a company called Banya Global. Banya Global is a consulting firm specialized in internal controls, specialized in risk, internal audit. We are assisting companies of all shapes and sizes, from publicly traded companies to government entities to not-for-profits, private organizations, with all things risk management, compliance, and internal audit. I founded that company in 2007, and then Sikich acquired us as of January 1st. So I've been part of the Sikich family now for almost a year. With Sikich, we're able to assist a broader spectrum of organizations, and we have, at our disposal a whole bunch of great resources. Carrie? Oh, nope. Carrie, where'd you go?
Did you want to mention the QR code?
I do.
On yours.
So up in the upper corner is a QR code. So get your camera out. That's to my LinkedIn profile. Carrie, what happened to your?
I think I'm a little further down. I think there's some other stuff in between. I don't know how it got moved around.
Huh. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, okay. All right. So Sikich, here's a little bit about Sikich. Somehow this order got messed up or screwed up. Sikich is a top accounting, technology, and advisory firm. The slide here says 1,800 plus employees. I think we're actually closer to 2,000 now. We're seeing some really great growth. We're well over 100 partners, and we serve clients in all 50 states. Carrie and I work in the governance, risk, and compliance practice of the firm, which is primarily focused on internal audit, which is, evaluating internal controls. So we spend our lives knee deep in internal controls. Other Sikich services that may fit your needs could be our audit services, maybe our outsourced accounting services, technology services, maybe human capital management or workforce risk management. If you have any questions on any of these services, you can contact either Carrie or myself or one of or your Sikich rep. I'm sure you have one. If not, we would be happy to assign one to you. There's Carrie. Good morning, Carrie. Tell them about you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. My name is Carrie Urbanski. I am a director within the Sikich GRC internal audit practice. I was born and raised and still live in Chicago. I started my career many years ago at Deloitte in the external audit practice. And for the past 20 plus years, I've been focused on all things Sarbanes-Oxley, internal controls, risk management, and internal audit. I was previously director of internal audit for a few different companies, two of which were publicly traded. And there's my QR code for my LinkedIn. Also would love to connect with all of you and whoever wants to reach out. That'd be great.
So as we're going through this presentation, this little piece is unscripted. As we're going through this presentation, feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll get to them if we can, if we have time at the end, or connect with us on LinkedIn and hit us up there with questions. Love to connect with you. So one more slide of preamble. This is the legal disclaimer our attorneys want us to include. It essentially says if you make any decisions based on what I'm about to say without consulting me and something goes wrong, you can't blame me. Kidding aside, on the flip side, I am hopeful there are quite a few things that you can take away from this presentation and immediately apply to add value to your organization. All right, let's get on with the show. Harnessing stability. I can't think of anything where stability is more important than walking across a tightrope. I've tried and I've failed, and I've tried again and I've failed again. The presentation today focuses on how internal controls can improve your operational stability. We're going to use the word organization to define the entity you work for, realizing that you may call it a department or an agency, a council, a bureau, a commission, a district, or something similar. Just understand when I use the word organization, we're referring to your entire entity. Information is constantly flowing in and out of your organization. Am I right? And you and your colleagues are handling and processing that information on a continual basis. Also, money, whether it's tax dollars, donations, grants, is constantly flowing in and out of your organization. And similarly, you and your colleagues are processing and accounting for those funds on a regular basis as well. So the question I have for you, and what I want you to consider this morning during the presentation, maybe later today when you're having lunch, or tonight as you're maybe binge watching your favorite show, is what's your organization doing to secure the flow of information and the flow of funds? I don't want these things to consume your every thought, but you're here for a reason. And if you spend some time considering organizational defense mechanisms, you'll create a strategic shield that allow you to focus your attention on other more important matters. This morning, we're going to tell you stories about mitigating risk and harnessing stability. We'll do our best to make them interesting and compelling, and in doing so, we're specifically going to discuss 5 primary topics. First is why you and everyone else in your organization is essential to the governance process. By governance, we're referring to how you govern your operations, how you manage risk in your organizations, not how you govern the population or the citizens. We're also going to talk about how risk management is important for every organization, regardless of size. We're going to talk about strategies to mitigate risk with an emphasis on internal controls. Internal controls are the mechanisms that enable things to happen as intended. Internal controls can be critical to any part of your organization. Oftentimes people think of internal controls as only financially driven. That can be any part of your organization. And then we'll share some stories about common internal control deficiencies and way to fix them. And then lastly, about ongoing management and monitoring of your internal controls. Throughout the day, we already showed you the codes you have to enter. There's going to be 3 of them. There's also going to be polling questions scattered throughout the presentation. These polling questions are also a requirement for you to get your CPE credit for attending. And with that, let's start with polling question number 1, and I'll pass it over to Carrie. Carrie, take it away.
Okay, so if you have policies and procedures, when was the last time they were updated? Within the last year, within the last 3 years, within the last 5 years, a long time ago, or never, we don't have documented policies and procedures. So just thinking about the policies and procedures, if you have them, when was the last time they were updated? We'll give you a couple of seconds there. Feel like we need some Jeopardy music.
So policy and procedures are one of the foundational pieces of good governance and risk management. That screen's a little small for me to read.
Do you want me to?
Carrie?
I can,
Yeah.
sure. So 33% have updated within the last year, 34%, so slightly higher within the last 3 years, 12% within the last 5, 17% a long time ago, and 4% never. We don't have documented policies and procedures.
So that's well over 60% are on the right track, on the right path.
Yes, yes.
Policies and procedures, as I said, they're foundational to good corporate governance. They should be well constructed, reflect the expectations you have of your employees, detail the requirements of the job. And as the question asks, it's not a one and done exercise, because as your operations change, so should your policies and procedures. So it's important to review them on a regular basis. I have examples of certain policies you should have. So if you ever are in question, please feel free to reach out and I'll send them over to you. Okay, on to topic number 1, why you are essential to the governance process. Leadership, whether hired, elected, or maybe appointed, sets the tone for the organization and is expected to promote and foster an ethical and responsible culture. At least I hope that's what their expectation is. This is called tone at the top. Leadership not only has to set the tone by what they say, they should be reinforcing the tone by what they do. We'll look at some news articles later that may not be the case. But while it starts at the top, governance is a responsibility that should be shared throughout your organization. For example, the head of accounting and finance plays a crucial role in identifying and managing financial risks. They're responsible for establishing robust financial controls and systems to safeguard assets and mitigate the risk of financial mismanagement or fraud. Employees or volunteers for your organization also play a critical role in effective governance in several important ways. Number 1, by adhering to high ethical standards, by complying with internal policies and procedures and external regulations. Employees and or volunteers have a responsibility, and hopefully they have access to channels for reporting misconduct or unethical behavior. Kind of along the lines, if you see something, say something. There's been quite a few stories recently, one with the FDIC where people had reported bad behavior and it was not taken as serious. So hopefully in your organization there is a mechanism for reporting things that aren't just aren't right. Back to governance, employees should avoid situations that pose an obvious conflict of interest. They should have a significant role in shaping the organization culture and its ethical tone. And everybody in your organization can influence customer and stakeholder relationships through professionalism, responsiveness, and then commitment to customer service. All this to say that the actions and behavior of everyone collectively influences your organization's governance practices and your ability to build trust with your stakeholders. Like I said, governance is everyone's responsibility, not just leadership. But everyone has a hand in it. You need to ensure, your organization needs to ensure there's socially responsible and ethical behavior. You need to implement appropriate systems and procedures to mitigate risk. You need to ensure the integrity of internal controls, technology and information systems, and financial reporting. You need to ensure disclosure controls and procedures are compliant with all relevant laws and regulations. You ensure compliance with all applicable legal and regulatory requirements. And you need to ensure the principal operating risks are identified and managed. A breakdown in any one of these could spell doom for your organization. So let's take care of our governance responsibility so that when your organization makes the news, it's because of the good deeds you do and the mission you serve and the value you recreate. But if it were only that easy, sometimes it can seem like you're pushing a boulder up a never-ending hill. You can have the greatest ideas, the biggest ambitions, but if you don't have the resources, it's nearly impossible to execute. And if you're like most organizations I've worked for or worked with, resources are not unlimited. You likely can't allocate adequate funds to instantly make your vision a reality. You're likely relying on dated technology, accumulating some or a lot of technology debt, resulting in overly manual processes. As far as internal controls go, you probably are great at rallying around a problem, but too many times a problem could have been, or possibly should have been, avoided if someone would have just done the right thing at the right time. Now, we're not in the firefighting business, unless, of course, you're actually in the firefighting business. So putting out little fires everywhere or one big fire distracts you from your mission, and conducting triage and operations is time-consuming, wasting valuable resources that could be used to support your mission and objectives. Even with these challenges, and maybe because of them, your role in governance is critical, because if you don't, the results could be horrendous. You can't afford a 6 or 7 figure wire fraud. A little later, I'm going to discuss, if I have time, some wire fraud schemes that are happening every day. You can't afford a security breach. Villains are attacking 24/7, and it isn't a matter of if your target, it's a matter of when. And you better have good backup and recovery capabilities, because you can't afford to be held hostage by ransomware. If you're storing confidential data, you can't afford a leak of PII. You can't afford to shut down because of a disaster, an accident, or an act of God, or a pandemic. You can't afford the loss of resources or funds due to mistakes, theft, or fraud, and you can't afford accounting errors to impact your funding sources or regulatory responsibilities. But no matter how well-intentioned you are, villains are out there trying to undermine your stability. They're dressed in normal clothes, doing normal things until they're not. What's showing on the screen are recent examples I pulled from Google. These are impacted organizations of all shapes and sizes. Some may look similar to yours. Unfortunately, they're not the only examples. This slide could have gone on for a long time, but for the sake of time, I limited the list. We've done presentations similar to this a few times in the past. Each time I refresh the list, it's really never ending, the news stories out there. As you can see, some of these lists are cyber attacks and data breaches. Did you know that numerous studies indicate that human error is behind most data breaches? A malicious attacker, a malicious actor may instigate, easy for me to say, but it's human error that opens the door. And it's not limited to cyber attacks. Many problems we find are due to human error. Oh, I failed to alert you. Here's another code, 628. So get your device out, type in the code. We want you to get your credit for this. 628. And it's in the chat. So if you're fumbling for your phone or you're in your web browser, it's in the chat. I'm moving on to the next page. The title of this presentation is Harnessing Stability. When stability reigns and everything is in balance, it can be hard to consider and plan for things going wrong. But as I showed on that prior slide, an imbalance can happen at any time, anywhere. Most of the problems we observe are not perpetrated by someone acting maliciously. Those make the headlines. But on the contrary, it's a good employee, a loyal employee, a faithful employee, someone who's trying to do the right thing for their organization, but they just make a mistake. Sometimes it's a minor mistake. Sometimes it's a terrible mistake, but still it's just a mistake. Kind of like the guy in the photo. The article that was attached to this photo said he was 1,600 feet in the air when he became unstable. Carrie, can you imagine hanging out alone?
No, I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out looking at the picture.
So I don't buy that he was 1,600 feet in the air, but I wouldn't want to be him even if he was only 16 feet in the air. I mean, there's obviously something there behind him. I don't know. But anyway, point of the matter is everyone makes mistakes. The busier we get, the more stress we're under, the more likely we are to make them. We need to have mechanisms in place to stop these errors. This guy probably should have a harness. I don't know why these guys don't have harnesses that attach to the line, but that's another story. So Carrie's going to take over from here, and she's going to share how we can harness the stability. But before she does, yes, we have a polling question. Carrie.
Okay. So how would you describe the maturity of your risk management program? Is it optimized, effective, developing with room for improvement, in the initial stages, or none? So when thinking about the maturity of your risk management program. Give you a couple of seconds here.
I can see it now. I was able to maximize my screen.
Okay.
For initial stages.
It's kind of a typical bell-shaped curve, developing with room for improvement.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I expected. I congratulate those of you who have effective.
Or even optimized.
Yeah, optimize is great. We're going to talk a little bit later to all three. I'll kind of the bell curve, but the bottom two, the initial stages are none. Those that are have room for improvement, and those that are effective or optimized. We'll have some strategies later for you to consider. Let me move on to the next page.
Okay.
Gary, it's back to you.
Okay, so similar to a lot of things in life, it starts with us as individuals. So I think we can all relate to that. But obviously, when representing or working for a constituency, there is a significant amount of responsibility on your shoulders. Like Steve mentioned, nobody wants to end up in the news. All of you are held to the highest ethical standards. And for governance and enterprise risk management strategies to work, you as individuals must be a part of that. Otherwise, it won't be effective. It will just not be effective. It will collapse. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so all organizations, no matter the size, the industry, whether it's private or public or nonprofit, have some sort of risk management strategies. Some are informal and some are more developed than others. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as we go through today, the questions we want you to be asking yourselves about are, what are your risk management strategies? Not only if those strategies can identify and mitigate risks, but are those strategies designed and operating effectively? And if your opinion or your assessment is solely based on a feeling or trust in the individuals performing the tasks, there are plenty of stories where the trust has broken down or even failed, which Steve has mentioned. It doesn't have to be malicious. It could be a mistake. And we're not saying, of course, not to trust your employees, but just giving some things to consider. So you may want to consider testing those strategies to ensure they are appropriate and operating as you intended. And if you don't have any form of risk management strategies, what can happen? Well, quite frankly, fraud. Steve showed the slide of various different headlines of real life frauds that have taken place over the past several years. Fraud happens at both large and small organizations, again, private, public, government, nonprofit, it does not discriminate. It can happen anywhere. So if you do have formal risk management strategies, that's great, you're ahead of the curve. You're effectively improving your chances of identifying risks coming up within your organization. And when you can identify the risks, you can effectively mitigate them. Most organizations employ what is called the 3 lines of defense model, and we'll go through that in more detail in the coming slides. Okay. So the 3 lines of defense model, it facilitates strong governance and risk management. all the roles within the 3 lines are working together collectively, and they contribute to the creation and protection of value, which is a win-win for everyone. In all of my roles in internal audit, we don't only want to preserve value, but it's also good if you can create value. So, but that's not just on internal audit, of course, that's up to leadership within the organization and management. So depending on the size, complexity, and staffing of your organization, you may have stronger first lines of defense and less so on the second and third lines. Or even perhaps in smaller organizations, the first and second lines are performed by people wearing multiple hats with multiple responsibilities. So the lines are a bit more blurred. And there's possibly very little difference between the first and second lines. So we'll go through these lines of defense in more detail in the coming slides.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add in, Carrie, that like we have people in our audience that are with very large government entities with hundreds, if not thousands of employees. And we also have some that probably only have 4 or 5, if that, people in their running their operations. The 3 lines of defense is applicable to everybody, right?
Definitely.
Definitely, yes. The larger organizations, you may have more resources to apply to these things, but you also have, more opportunities for risk. The risks are the same whether you're large or small. Just the opportunities for them to materialize a little greater for the larger organization.
Okay. So moving on to the first line. The first line of defense is your employees and what they're doing in their day-to-day jobs. So hopefully they're following established and documented policies and procedures in a bit of a perfect world, or at a minimum, they're following procedures they were taught on the job related to what they need to accomplish and what their tasks are in their daily jobs. Policies and procedures, whether defined or informal, preferably, of course, we want them defined. They help guide employees in their jobs and how they're supposed to perform tasks. And included within those policies and procedures or elsewhere in the organization might be and probably are internal controls. And we'll talk more about internal controls and how they're defined on the next slide. But when internal controls are designed and defined and operating effectively, they help protect the organization. If there are weaknesses or cracks in this first line of defense, which I really think of as truly foundational, it becomes harder to catch issues. So there's an increased chance of fraud and risks you're not aware of coming to the surface and causing a bigger issue than it truly needs to be.
And I'll interject here as well, Carrie. Sorry for interrupting you. Is that
No worries.
I work with a large privately owned company. They're $1 billion. They're about to make a significant acquisition that will almost double their size, and they're in the technology space, and that's all I'll say about them. In conversations with them, there's a risk, and it's called institutional knowledge. What we've found in conversations is that the procedures are poorly documented, and one person knows what their responsibilities are because they've been doing it for a long time, or it was told to them or taught to them by someone else. And that's bad enough as it is. If they leave suddenly, those responsibilities will be difficult to train the next person. But more than that, they're running in so many different directions. Individuals are wearing multiple hats, and so when they're doing multiple different jobs and none of them are documented, that's a significant problem. So one of my recommendations is we got to take some time and document what these key players are doing.
And in my experience, I've seen too, it can lead to just inefficiencies. People might be doing the same thing. That's why we just stress so much to document. Yep. Okay. So let's define internal controls. So the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the governing body for the internal audit profession, they're kind of like what the AICPA is to accountants, but exclusively dedicated to internal audit professionals. The IIA sets the standards all internal auditors should conform to. And the IIA's definition of internal controls is they are policies and procedures implemented by an organization to ensure their financial reports are reliable, that operations are efficient, and activities are compliant with applicable laws and regulations. So internal controls, I've for many years been just saying, they just make good business sense. They are essential to good governance. They should be documented in procedures. They should be understood by employees. They also should be reviewed by management and organization leadership. Also, they should be tested to ensure they are effective. We talked a little bit about testing, but we'll talk some more about the importance of testing the internal controls.
I'm going off script. So Carrie, we just had Thanksgiving. Did you have a nice Thanksgiving, by the way?
I did. I had a very nice Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Good. And you stayed local, right?
I did. I hosted at home. Yes.
All right. So I traveled recently, and I have global entry. So I get TSA free, which if those of you on the phone travel at all and you don't have it, I would say go get it, because it really makes that much easier. Anyway, I was in line going through the TSA pre. It's pretty simple. There was a gentleman in front of me, goes through the X-ray machine, whatever, and it goes off. And he's on the other side of the X-ray machine. That's, sirens are going off. The security guard stops him and says, "Sir, did you empty your pockets? You must have something." He's like, "Oh, it must be my belt." He takes off his belt. He goes through and puts the belt on the conveyor, walks through, it goes off again. I stop him, and he's like, well, maybe it's my keys. And so he goes out and puts the keys on the conveyor and goes through, and he goes through, and it goes off again. And then I think the third time it may have been his phone or his wallet. Anyway, so he hands the phone, let's say it was phone to the security guard. "It's my phone." And then he keeps walking like, "Sir, you need to go back through." So, all right, so I tell this story, and I was thinking about it as it was happening. Why is there security in the first place? It's to mitigate a risk, right? It's to mitigate, God forbid, something happening like we saw back in 9/11. So it is from a risk perspective, I think the likelihood is small, but impact would be very, very high. So it's a really critical internal control, having security there. Me, having been through it a million times, it's a very seamless, easy, efficient control. And this guy obviously hasn't been through it, even though he's TSA pre, hasn't been through it a lot. And it was a really inefficient control for him. So I bring it up because internal controls are important. Sometimes they're inefficient, especially if they're brand new to you. But over time, they just become a course of normal business, and it increases or doesn't detract from efficiency.
I just
I don't know, hope that was
Go ahead, sorry.
valuable. I don't know. It was interesting for me as I'm watching this take place. I'm like, this is a great example of internal control. Go ahead.
I love that you're seeking out internal controls in daily life. I do the same thing, so we're both internal audit, internal control nerds. So I think that's funny.
All right. So anyway, internal controls are everywhere, whether you know it or not. And
yep.
And TSA security is an internal control.
Okay, so moving on. So the second line of defense, as discussed earlier, could be the same individuals as in the first line of defense. This might be the case for very lean organizations. For other organizations, larger ones, there might be a separate function or groups. So whether you have a full-blown ERM group, enterprise risk management, or you just regularly sit with your teams to discuss risks and how to mitigate them, it really truly doesn't matter. The important thing is that it's being done. Sitting around a table discussing what risks you should be considering in the coming year and how you should address them is a mitigation strategy that can be applied at smaller organizations. And for some risks, when talking about the second line of defense, it could be an outsourced risk mitigation strategy. For instance, you might have outside counsel, or you could also have an insurance broker for insurable risks. But the important thing is identifying, understanding, and then applying a mitigation strategy. Those are the important things. And if you're not in the process of identifying risks, you won't be able to determine how to remediate issues or apply a risk management strategy to them. So similar to the first line of defense, if risks are not identified or there are weaknesses in the second line of defense, then the chances of those risks occurring or you being unprepared for unidentified risks increases.
There's a philosophy of big R, big C, little c. And so in your risk mitigation strategy, if you've got a big risk, you should have a big control. If you've got a small risk, you should have a small control, just to help efficiency, right? You don't want to have a small risk with a big control and really bog down a process where the risk doesn't warrant the control. So while they use the example of the TSA, it is a big risk with a big control, but if it's not a big risk, you don't need to invest the time on bogging down a process.
Right, overkill, it's cost versus benefit, truly.
This is your third line.
Yep. So for most private, government, and smaller organizations, we find this to be the most neglected line of defense. The third line of defense is independent assurance, and it establishes accountability within the organization. It is important that individuals know someone will be looking to ensure that things are done appropriately. It surely doesn't hurt that people are aware that people will be looking. When we do internal audits, or we are the internal audit function and outsourced function for organizations, we conduct risk assessments, we look at the design of internal controls, and we test the operating effectiveness of the controls. We don't just rely on the fact that controls have been done and they've been performed by the control owners that they're performing them. We trust, but we verify through testing. Again, not saying not to trust your employees, but it's trust but verify. Unfortunately, most smaller organizations do not have a third line of defense, and they can benefit greatly from doing periodic general internal controls reviews. We have done these for several organizations. We come in, we review controls over a wide range of processes and give our assessment related to the internal controls design and whether they are operating as you intended. So this gives some assurance to the leadership team, leadership within the organization, and again, establishes accountability within the organization. If you don't have a third line of defense, how do you really know that what you designed is truly functioning? And if there were changes in, say, people, processes, technology, what happens to the design? It oftentimes can morph into something that you never had intended, but you don't know if things aren't documented and if someone's not looking at it. Again, there's a potential risk that controls may not be working, and if nobody is looking, you may not know until it's too late.
Next coming is another poll question, I believe. Yep, there we go. Yep. Gary.
Okay, so how confident are you in your internal control environment? Extremely confident, I sleep well at night. Confident, but sometimes I have restless sleep. Moderately concerned, I sleep with one eye open. Extremely concerned, sleep, but sleep, or no opinion. So the confidence in your internal control environment. This should be interesting. They're all interesting poll questions. Okay. Moderately concerned. Confident, but sometimes I have restless sleep. Okay.
I'm hopeful that those that are extremely confident have an internal audit function within your organization.
Me too.
Operating effectively. I'm confident, but I sometimes lose sleep as well. I think that's where I would be as far as the organization I run and also the organizations I serve as far as client service. There's always room for improvement and there's always risk. Again, all it takes is a mistake or someone circumventing something because it's easier. There we go. So thank you, Carrie, for the explanation of the 3 lines of defense and specifically with internal controls. Why are internal controls needed? Really to make sure things happen as intended. As Carrie said, she's in Chicago. I'm also in Chicago. I actually live down the street from DePaul University. One of the accounting professors at DePaul is Kelly Richmond Pope. Some of you may know her, may have actually spoken to her. Kelly produced a documentary called All the Queen's Horses. I'm also guessing many of you probably heard of it, maybe you've seen it. If not, I encourage you to look it up. It's called All the Queen's Horses. It's a story of a small town in Illinois, Dixon, which also happens to be Ronald Reagan's birthplace. Those of you in Illinois, I'm sure, know this story. Dixon was the victim of the largest municipal fraud in US history. The villain who perpetrated the fraud was a long-standing and trusted employee. The hero in the story was a soft-spoken, loyal employee who simply asked one question. It is quite a story. Again, it's called All the Queen's Horses for those of you who are interested. I like that second quote. We've never had any issues, said every leader prior to something happening. Another code, this code 3 of 3. After entering this code, you are in the clear. I'll give you a minute to get it entered. And I see that it's already been placed in the chat, so I'll move on. Now we're going to share some internal control deficiency stories. Oftentimes we get called in after something breaks so that we can assist with the triage, essentially picking up the pieces after something bad happens and figuring out root causes. Other times we're asked to proactively help so that things don't break in the first place, as Carrie mentioned, relative to the third line of defense. These are those stories. The goal is to have you learn and apply lessons to your organization. Ooh, Carrie, this is you.
Okay. So one of the best ways to protect yourself is also one of the most common deficiencies that we see, which is segregation of duties. So one single person should not have complete access to a process without another person being involved. And this is very important for all organizations, no matter the size, and we cannot emphasize this enough. Some examples of conflicting duties are the same person is responsible for both preparing customer bills and collecting payments. The person who handles billing could potentially manipulate customer accounts or misappropriate funds without detection. Or the person responsible for recording transactions in the accounting system also reconciling the bank statements. You don't want this. This lack of segregation of duties means there's less oversight, and errors or irregularities in recording transactions may go unnoticed. We completely understand that segregation of duties can be difficult to achieve in smaller organizations. So it's important to be creative on how to achieve this. And we've helped countless organizations with this challenge. Account reconciliations, another common deficiency that we see. Organizations hopefully are performing reconciliations in a timely manner, doing this regularly, investigating age transactions, large or unusual transactions, and any differences, and performing independent review. Account recs are controls to monitor and hopefully catch items that may be indicative of breakdowns in your processes. And I've seen throughout my career, maybe staffing changes, there's staffing cuts, someone leaves unexpectedly, and account recs fall to the wayside, and that is such a dangerous, slippery slope. Or I've seen that they are being performed, but they're not being reviewed. So the importance of them being performed regularly and independently review, and again, looking at large, unusual items, transactions, and differences. Cannot emphasize that enough.
I serve a not-for-profit, sit on the board, and we have a board member review the account recs, just because it's a small, very lean organization. So we make sure we have an independent party do the review of the account reconciliation.
Good, very important. Cash is an obvious area you want good segregation of duties. Also, an important task related to cash is at least annually reviewing the banking authorities. I think that this sometimes can get forgotten. I've seen situations where previous employees who have long since left the organization still have banking authority. So just one of those cleanup things, just doesn't take very long to do, at least annually take a look at banking authorities. Of course, it's important to have tight controls over cash, and that it's not within one individual's purview is critical. Vendor setup and payments is another area that we see many deficiencies. Of course, you want to ensure these responsibilities are segregated.
So I mentioned all the Queen's horses in Dixon. I've got the woman's name. I'm not even going to do her the justice of mentioning her name, but the person over, gosh, 20 plus years embezzled whole millions and millions of dollars. And she did it by creating a fictitious bank account in the city name that was actually in reality her personal account. And she diverted funds from the city account to her account. And it looked like a city account to the bank, but it was her personal account, which allowed her to siphon off millions and millions of dollars. And the reason it was able to happen because there wasn't proper internal controls and oversight. She was trusted, she was well respected, liked, and she was able to conceal her activities because there wasn't oversight. So the importance of internal controls over cash and the handling of cash. And then another example I wanted to bring up is I've heard dozens, unfortunately, dozens of stories over the past couple months, really since probably June is when they started, flooding in, where an organization has a vendor and the vendor was hacked, and the nefarious party just sat on information until a invoice was generated, a legit invoice was generated from the vendor for a large amount, and the hacker intercepted that invoice, changed the banking instruction, and sent it on to the unsuspecting client, but the unsuspecting company. And they, without adequate procedures to validate a banking change, unfortunately, all too often they pay the wire, and they don't learn until it's way too late to recover the money. One specific client, we did some work with them years ago and identified some deficiencies in their accounts payable function, but they never addressed them. And this was, gosh, I don't know, I guess it must have been the summer of 2021. This scheme happened to them. The invoice was a $325,000 invoice, and they didn't adhere to the validation procedures and paid the fraudulent wire. So it's happening. It's important to have validation procedures when banking information changes from a service provider of yours, and you can't just rely on the person sending you the email. You got to actually pick up the phone and call the key contacts within that service provider, not the email or phone number in the email that you received with the changed banking instructions. Gary.
Okay. So expense reimbursement. With expense reporting processes, I think most organizations have seen something related to this. People get creative. We've seen people purchase a China set and put it through as a meal expense because it was written in Japanese and didn't think that somebody would be able to read the language. Again, people get creative, so keep an eye out. It's kind of like thinking like a fraudster, being ahead of the game. Payroll, making sure that there are controls around new hires and changes to payroll. We saw a very large retail pharmacy store that caught its managers delaying the termination date for employees in their system so that they could take the last paycheck and cash it at a currency exchange, grocery store, and a variety of different other methods to cash the check. So can't emphasize enough, making sure there's controls, new hires, changes, terminations. Policies and procedures, we've talked about general policies and procedures. We have not talked at a higher level the importance of such things as a conflict of interest policy, a whistleblower policy, as well as a whistleblower program. Steve had mentioned that at the beginning, but if implemented properly, whistleblower programs allow employees or others to report issues or potential issues anonymously. And then as far as the last item on here, most of what we've talked about is on the finance side of the house, but there are a lot of controls and issues that can come up in IT. We've talked a bit about cybersecurity. But in small IT departments, you can have a lot of responsibilities within a very few number of individuals. Or some of those individuals may have what's called privileged user access, essentially giving them the keys to the kingdom. They can make any change within the system for any data without anyone being able to see it. One of our clients was a very fast-growing technology company, and in their efforts to make sure they were addressing questions from the business in a timely manner, they gave several of their IT individuals privileged user access. Thankfully, no issues were identified, but the ability and the opportunity were there to be able to do something. And I've actually also seen where an ERP system is implemented and it was taking longer. Of course, they go over budget and it's taking longer than anticipated. So they gave everyone admin access. And that was at a newly public company. So larger ramifications as it relates to Sarbanes-Oxley, but still just things to be aware of.
So I've been married for a really long time, and God love my wife. She has to put up with all my risk and internal control nonsense, but it's obviously sunk in because she was out to dinner one night with colleagues and clients, and it was a big celebratory dinner for some. I don't remember why they were celebrating, but big celebratory dinner. And then at the end of the night, a couple people ordered extra meals and took them home and put them on submitted it supposedly, or assumption was they were submitting them on their expense report because they paid with the same credit card for everything. So she came home and she was telling me about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I'm like, well, number one, does it violate a policy? Who were the people who approved it, and does it violate a policy? If it violates a policy, if you see something, say something. So from expense reporting, things like that, like how many meals were ordered, how many people were attended, can you is it possible to verify that? We did some work with a secondary school, and there's a situation where the controller went on a vacation, and the controller's allowed to go on vacation. I think there's a 4-person accounting staff. So as the controller goes on vacation, business still has to run. So he grants his access to one of his staff people. Things are fine, goes on vacation, comes back, things are still fine. We come in 18 months later after his vacation and find that that staff person still had his access. Trustworthy, no mistakes happened, nothing nefarious happened, but the access was there. The recommendation for them is you got to review access on a regular basis. Another instance where someone in finance was managing payroll, another smaller organization, lean accounting finance staff, not-for-profit organization. They outsourced payroll through ADP through a web portal. Very common practice. Two people had access, I guess, must have been 2 people to the ADP payroll portal. One person left the company, took a different job. I think it was 3 or 4 months later, we went in there and we're looking at user access. The former employee still had admin access to payroll. What does that mean? They could have changed salaries. They could have routed money to fake employees. They could have any one of a number of areas. So it's important to have, and this happens all the time, where people leave a company and their access isn't shut off. My recommendation is always to have a termination checklist when an employee is terminated or before he leaves voluntarily. Have a checklist and make sure that all access is shut off. And it's important to have, even if you've done it a million times, to have everything, all their accesses on a checklist, because with this, with all the new cloud apps that are being deployed, sometimes you don't even know what applications are being used. Another institution, a higher education, working with their IT security function, they had everything locked down really well. The security was top notch. A university, so you expect them to make sure that their students are are safe, that their confidential information is confidential. And so they did a great job. And then we asked the next question is, what about the colleges within the university? What about the deans? Well, the deans can do essentially whatever they want. They don't have to go through procurement or go through information security, because sometimes they need applications for their classroom. I'm like, well, what security provisions are there? I said, well, there really aren't. So what if they're doing a research project that has personally identifiable information? Well, we don't control that. So it's not just understanding and controlling what you know, it's understanding what you may not know and controlling that as well. From a internal controls perspective. And we're running up on the top of the hour here. So I want to share a good story. Ethics hotline complaint came in alleging improper revenue recognition, which improper revenue recognition, they were recognizing revenue too early and pushing expenses out, inflating profitability, which impacted bonuses. That was the allegation. So we went in and investigated. They had really well documented policies and procedures. They had a really great system of internal controls. We were able to take and walk transactions through the process from procure to pay, tested the billing, tested the revenue recognition processes, and it turned out to be a false allegation. We were able to validate that because they had a really good system of controls in place. Oh.
Okay, so Steve, you'll now talk about ongoing management and monitoring of your internal controls. All right.
In 3 minutes yes. Or less, I think.
Yes.
All right. So with all this, what can you do? And again, I've got examples that if you have questions or want some information, please contact me. I'm happy to share what I can. So what can you do? The theme of the day has been harnessing stability. You should set out to do the things that will make your organization more stable. It starts by setting a strong tone at the top that motivates and encourages employees to be responsible and ethical. You should determine what the highest risks are that you face, and you make sure you mitigate the highest risk first. I talked about big R, big C, little r, little c. Take a look at your lines of defense and how you divide the responsibility for risk management. Dust off and evaluate your policies and procedures. Update them as needed. Share them across the organization. Make sure everybody has access to them and has read them. If you don't have them, create them. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. Finally, don't forget about the third line of defense. You should be periodically reviewing your internal controls by completing it's generally known as a general internal controls assessment. What is it? General controls assessment, Carrie touched on it earlier a little bit. It's an evaluation of your internal control design and operating effectiveness over the items listed on the screen. Things like revenue, fixed assets, payroll, treasury, user access, and the rest here. How are you safeguarding assets and preventing fraud? How are you segregating duties? I would guess that if you're not in a high rise, if you go outside, there might be big concrete flower pots on sidewalk. Those are actually an internal control because it prevents vehicles from crashing up into your building. That is a physical security control. So we evaluate the design and operating effectiveness of internal controls. How do we do it? We walk through each of the areas to assess the risk and validate that it's being mitigated. We work with management to resolve any issues as they arise. So if we notice something's deficient from a risk management perspective, we'll bring it up. At the end of this assessment, everything is summarized in a report, which essentially creates a punch list of management actions that can be knocked out periodically, such as an annual review of user access. Right? So whether you're bringing in a third party like us to do this, or you're doing it internally, or you have an internal audit department, the reason you evaluate the effectiveness of your internal controls is to affect change, positive change in your organization. And if you can have large or small, a punch list of things you do on a regular basis, whether it's account reconciliations, user access reviews, and then, the list can go on and on, but a hopefully manageable list of things you do on a periodic basis, monthly, quarterly, annually. You'll end up getting yourself in that bucket that says, I can sleep easy at night. All right, how am I doing on time? Oh, we're at the top of the hour. Okay. Didn't leave room for questions and answers. Here are the links to our LinkedIn profiles. Once again, please connect with us. If you have questions, don't be bashful. We're happy to answer them. There's obviously no commitment to hire us. If you do have needs, contact your Sikich rep. Feel free to reach out to us, whether it's with internal controls or any other part of your operations. I want to say, Carrie, unless there's anything else to add, I want to say thank you for your attendance. Yeah. And I really enjoyed presenting.
And if there's any questions, we can follow up individually.
Yeah, we will do that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great holiday.
Thanks.